The management of security in schools is perhaps one of the most difficult tasks currently facing senior secondary managers. We've drawn together a group of experts to reflect on some of the more challenging issues. Patrick Nash is the Chief Executive of the Teacher Support Network. Karen Todd of Ergo Consultants is an ex-head who specialises in leadership training. Jerry Bartlett is the Deputy General Secretary of the NASUWT. Julie Bentley is the Chief Executive of the Susie Lamplugh Trust, who specialise in personal safety skills. Mike Cording of Behaviour Learning is also an ex-head who specialises in behaviour management training.
So our concern in relation to weapons in particular is that we don't actually know. A lot of stories told, aren't there? We don't actually know what the incidence is of the carrying of knives or guns in schools. We know it happens.
People say that, there's no such thing as bad publicity, but if you're a school head, that's the last thing that you want. So most heads want to deal with this quietly and privately and in-house.
And that inevitably leads to underreporting.
And if you're in competition with neighbouring schools for pupils.
That's right.
Absolutely.
We certainly don't talk about how many weapons have been brought in last week or how many were in on a Wednesday afternoon.
So it's for that reason that a number of our organisations are supporting the request of the School Security Working Party that airport-style random samples of students turning up for school in the morning are conducted in order to give us an idea of what the real incidence of weapons carrying is.
And how is that going to be seen in terms of weapons? What will they perceive to be a weapon?
I think that's a really good point, because some of the worst of the incidents that do occur don't involve implements that persons would normally consider to be weapons.
I've seen some nasty injuries inflicted with a pen. I'd be interested in the effect on the school if there'd been a random search at some of the schools that I've worked in, what state those children would be in by the time they got into the classroom, and whether it would actually be more detrimental to the staff than not having the search random or whatever.
And there is that whole issue about the fear of crime and the fear of scenarios. And as we said, schools aren't as dangerous as maybe the media sometimes makes it out to be.
We do know, don't we, that we're being required to address a far larger number of violent incidents in schools than's ever been in the case in the past. What we don't know, I think coming back to your point, is whether that's because things were swept under the carpet. For example, it's the policy of NASUWT to require head teachers to report to the police all violent incidents that occur on school premises. Now, there's a great reluctance to do that for the reasons you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as a trainer, our advice is always not to put hands on, and that you look for all the de-escalation techniques and the skills to go before it. And that's one of the things that concerns me about teachers being given the techniques to restrain.
We certainly take a lot of calls from teachers that are asking our counselling team about what to do about a situation where they feel like they might have to get in and restrain, and we give exactly the advice you give, which is actually no. We absolutely would recommend a hands-off approach, and we'll coach people over the telephone, in advance on de-escalation techniques. So that's very much part of the advice and the sort of support we're giving out on a day-to-day basis to teachers facing that. So I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying.
But if you're doing break duty or dinner duty and you're in a playground and you hear that a fight's broken out somewhere else, you hear the shout of fight, and children running across a playground, and you actually get over there and see that you've got two kids
locked with each other.
Then it's very difficult not to get involved.
That's
because, again, you have a duty of care about what you're going to do. And teachers do get involved because they care about the children that are there. And emotion often takes over in situations
and I think
that's a really important issue, actually.
It gives teachers an absolutely appalling professional dilemma, because a teacher who doesn't intervene in a situation where they could have prevented one child from injuring another is actually vulnerable to litigation on behalf of those representing the child. At the same time, the highest incidence of false allegations against teachers occurs when teachers have intervened to try and protect the safety of pupils in their charge.
I think this is where teachers really need a broad bag of skills, because I think there always will be times where some level of physical intervention has to happen, some of the examples you've just given. But I think that there's a risk that if they feel able to do that and they feel empowered to do that, then actually, as you were saying, it's possible that the kind of avoidance diffusion skills might be overlooked. And I think that what's really important is that teachers feel really, really confident and equipped with the diffusion skills, but also have the knowledge in terms of the more physical side of things. But invariably, if you go into what's already an aggressive situation with physical contact, which is by its nature perceived to be aggressive, then the possibility of that being escalated even higher, I think, is a very real risk. I mean, we would always say in terms of personal safety, you avoid, you diffuse, and only if there's absolutely no other option do you utilise physical moves. Yeah.
Teachers have got to understand and really believe totally that they're not responsible for the children's behaviour. They're responsible for managing it effectively. The children are responsible for their own behaviour. And so that if a child said that they're going to leave, I mean, my advice to all teachers and trainers, don't stand in the doorway, because, you tell the child not to go, obviously, and you've got systems in place to deal with the child who goes out. But whatever you do, don't stand in the doorway, because suddenly you've got an assault on or whatever else to deal with.
Or an accusation of assault.
That's right.
Yeah, either way, that's a very risky situation for the teacher indeed, and I think that's good advice.
But for
one of the things that I'm interested in is the kind of contact that we're getting from schools and staff and head teachers about the kind of issue of protection for staff in schools, and to what degree should staff be being protected by equipment like personal alarms, etc., and who's responsible for that, and does the teacher make their own choice about whether they use methods like that, or should it be the head that's making those decisions? When we think about schools, we think about it as, well, actually the school is a workplace, and many teachers are lone workers. And the advice that we give lone workers in other situations would be carry alarms, have you got your dynamic risk assessment processes, but are they transferable to the school?
You see burglar alarms all over the place now. How many people actually respond when they go off?
How effective are they?
And how effective are they? Because they listen, and after a while, car alarms, people don't move.
I agree with your cynicism about how effective personal alarms are. However, we have found in particular situations that panic buttons in classrooms can be a very useful way for a person who's at risk to summon assistance when it's needed, providing you have a procedure in place to ensure that there is a prompt response when it's needed.
Isn't it?
you're always vulnerable as a teacher to assault, to attack, to false allegation. So there are basic things that you have to do there that keep you safe. You're not in a room with one person by yourself with the door closed. Common sense things like that. But if it's at a higher level, then it's got to be a whole school debate.
And I think that's one thing that heads and senior leadership teams need to take on board, that you can't tick the box where behaviour management or classroom management is concerned, because your staff is changing all the time, so you need to have that training ongoing throughout the school.
That's right, and that needs to be, policies are fine, but they need to be supported with practicality. We go into workplaces and they give us their policies and they've got panic alarms, and the first thing that our trainers do when they go in the workplace is they hit the panic button. 90% of the time, nothing happens, because they actually haven't ever tested whether the procedure worked. The more tools you have, like CCTV or, alarms, or you think that's going to protect you. Well, most of them actually won't protect you. What they'll do is they'll gain evidence to show what happened to you, but they won't necessarily stop it happening.
By then the damage is done.
Exactly
that, yes.
Which comes back to the point about
business as usual. I think just going straight from incident to business as usual is very, very, very undermining.
I've come across one school that actually has what they call an assertive resolution. So that if a teacher has an incident like that, the child doesn't come back, the rest of the department has to pick up that child till the member of staff and the child sit down with a third party if necessary. There's a script that they have to follow. And it's not about what went wrong, it's about what the expectations are for the next lesson. And that empowers the teacher, because what the teacher's getting a clear message across, that this is what I expect in my classroom.
Also gives a very clear message to the child about cause and effect. and consequence, which means you're going to have to go back through this process. We're going to have to sit down and talk about this.
Well, I'm very sorry about this, but I suspect that NASWT would take a much harder line than any of you over this. I mean, the union takes the view that assault on a teacher by a pupil is never acceptable, can never be justified, and should never be tolerated. And we would always want a child responsible for an assault to be suspended at least and probably permanently excluded, not necessarily as a sanction against the child, but for two reasons. Firstly, to send messages to other pupils in the school that violence is not going to be tolerated in the establishment. And secondly, because paradoxically, children who commit violent assaults on adults obviously have special needs, and often those special needs will not be catered for unless they're excluded, which focuses the attention of the relevant authorities and the need to assess their problems and address them.
What I was talking about though was trying to get zero tolerance at a much earlier level, so that you actually limit the number of times that the violence occurs, because you're dealing with it effectively and assertively at a low level, so that any incident where the child needs to be removed by on call because they've refused to do as they're told, or whatever that could lead to it, the member staff has the power.
But I think you're right. It's like getting in at the early stage of a behaviour problem, because it's often an undealt with issue in a certain child or young person that then leads ultimately to that violent act.
The dilemma for senior staff, of course, is that balance, isn't it? It's between the protection of the teaching staff, but it's also then, but then we have the responsibility toward the young person, and what happens with this young person? We exclude them. That solves one side of the problem possibly, but the young person has problems. There's going to be personal safety issues and implications for the local community more broadly. So that is a real tension, isn't it, for senior staff in a school?
It's totally radical here. You exclude somebody for violence, and you're giving them what? If it's just a low-level one, you give them 5 days, so they get 5 days holiday. It's not exactly the best way to deal with the issue.
Young people who are violent are disturbed young people, and it's what's the root of that disturbance? And the sad reality is we don't have the resources in the system. We don't have. Well, I mean, the most important thing after an incident, however big or however small or perhaps insignificant, the most important thing is for a teacher to get support immediately. And as I say, Teacher Support Line is 24/7 counselling service is available immediately, and we would encourage any teacher that's been involved in any incident whatsoever, the first thing they need to do is to report the incident and seek professional help and advice.
Am I being naive in thinking as a head I felt I would have been in breach of my duty if somebody had to go and ring you up rather than go and deal with it within?
No, and I think it's actually a sad fact that more heads don't think like that. The teachers in their thousands turn to Patrick's organisation, Teacher Support Network. One of the reasons that we're so pleased that your organisation exists and why we recommend NASWT members to come to you is actually the absolute confidentiality in which you deal with these matters.
If there's an incident in school, then the head has a responsibility in lots of different ways. So they have a responsibility to the member of staff, to the pupil, in terms of governors and the LEA. There are, as you said before, there's a procedure that has to kick in straight away.
They're not a confidential counsellor or friend. Actually, they're the boss at the end of the day, and they have statutory roles.
Isn't it? I mean, one of the most valuable things it sounds like in any kind of post-incident procedure is the recognition that you need to refer that staff member onto an external independent
and the
group
head teachers
that provide
organisation
that.
evidence we have is that even services that are provided by the employer, teachers don't trust them as much as they trust. There's no two ways around that, and that's why an independent organisation such as ours, I think, is so appropriate.
If you would like further information on the issues discussed here, including contact details for the Teachers Support Network and other organisations mentioned in this programme, then log on to www.teachers.tv.